Hi folks, my name is Ted Alexander. Today I'm in Arlington, Virginia to visit with and interview one of the most famous military historians in the world, Mr. Ed Bars. I'm going to talk with Mr. Bars for the next hour or so. Thank you for having us, Mr. Bars.
Well, I have always enjoyed you, and I always hark back to our first real connection was when you were just had come to work for the Park Service, and you were assigned to Antietam.
Yes, I think we met.
And you were. This was the time of the bicentennial of the Civil War, and you asked me to come up and chat with you about Chambersburg and the Civil War, particularly about and Antietam, and then we had some conversations, and they're very, in my mind, a lot of importance. That is when you went to school to enhance and enrich your athletic, your scholastic
Yes.
challenges.
I went to get a master's.
And I think I was one of the ones that recommended that you go.
You did, sir. Yes, yes, indeed. I remember that.
That would be, and then I remember a few programs that when you were working with National Capital, and you were one of the organizers in more or less of a round table down at National Capital, and I remember who one of your assistants, one of your people that you worked very closely there with was Gary Scott.
Gary Scott, he's retired now, like I am, from the National Park Service. You started life in Montana. Can you tell us about your life in Montana?
All right, I was, my grandfather on my father's side, who I'm named for, had a he was a person that drifted and was always looking for something he wanted to do. He had worked in the coal mines at Logan, West Virginia, which is probably, if you're talking about labor problems, one of the acme of labor problems of any county in the United States. How did he get to Montana? He went up to, there was bookmaking in Windsor, Ontario, across the Detroit River from Detroit. And he went up there on a weekend by train and broke the bookmaker.
Oh my.
And the bookmaker handed him the keys to his car and told him, I'm giving you my car because I can't pay you. So he drove the car back to Guyandotte, West Virginia, which is on the opposite side of the river from Huntington. Mm-hmm. And he both learned to drive and arrived home where he had I think he just had two sisters at that time. Mm-hmm. And he arrived in the car with a brand new car. And he'd always wanted to buy a ranch. And they bought, he was a partner in Coal and Crane, which became a big coal company in Logan County. Logan County was at that time a non-union county with a real tough sheriff, with a real tough bunch of deputies.
They didn't like
and that's where they first time they ever used the National Guard to bomb anybody. And that was right after the World War II. There was a battle of I forget what mountain it is.
Some mountain.
Yeah.
Was that after World War I?
Yes. And that's where the management, using the sheriff, got tough.
Mm-hmm.
So he, in about 1916, he and he told my grandmother, who was a long-suffering person, let's go out to Montana. He says, I've always wanted to buy a ranch. I've got a good investment on the Coal and Crane Lumber Coal Company, and I will drive out there. Naturally, he was learning to drive, and so I wonder he didn't kill his wife on the way out there. Well, I'll tell you one thing, he goes to the top of Mount Washburn. That at that time was the highest mountain in Yellowstone Park that had a road you could drive over the top of.
Oh my.
And being a novice driver, being very tight with his money, he decided to coast down Mount Washburn.
Oh my.
Took the car out of gear. And when you take a car out of gear on a mountain road, you're in deep shit. But he had enough sense to go into the borrow pit at the side. And before he left Montana, he had went out on Sarpy, where there was a man who was a wannabe painter from New England that had put together a number of homesteads. Now, homesteads can be as large as a half a square mile or a full square mile. But his wife did not like Montana, and was not happy with him being buying these homesteads and putting them together. And my grandfather bought the ranch. It was a large ranch. It was over 8,000 acres.
Wow.
And he owned it, and he was going to be he only came to the ranch twice a year. And that was to drive out from Peru, Indiana, and go to the ranch. Because he put my father on to run the ranch, and he was lucky in getting it. My father's sisters married off to fairly well-to-do men.
Mm-hmm.
And he went into the cattle business.
This
and
was your father or your grandfather?
Huh?
Your father or your grandfather?
My grandfather. My grandfather was born in 1866.
Oh.
And then he bought the ranch, but then he maintained a seat on the Chicago Board of Trade. So his main business was on having a seat on the Chicago Board of Trade, buying and selling. He also liked to play the horses, and that's how he got to get enough money to buy the ranch. And he did not visit the ranch very often. And in 1919, my father was in the Marine Corps in World War I. Spent his entire enlistment down in Haiti because there was trouble in Haiti. And of course, my grandfather's first cousin is Mike. Mike is a Medal of Honor recipient during the Philippine insurrection and became a recipient of both the Navy Cross and the Army Distinguished Service Cross in the Army during World War II. So he was a big Marine hero. Except for having horses, it would be like in the 1890s. My grandfather, his wife, and two of my father's sisters all moved out to Montana. Now, my grandfather and his wife and the girls drove out in the car my grandfather won off the bookmaker, which was a pretty big car. And my father and a friend of his drove an international truck out, and they slept in all the deserted schoolhouses on the way out.
See.
So he's decided my father's going to be managing the ranch. And my father, I don't think really was enthused about the ranch as his father was. And that's where my father met my mother. My mother's mother went to Oberlin, which is a very liberal college.
In Ohio?
Oberlin, Ohio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she got a degree from Oberlin. And
this is your mom. This is your mother.
My grandmother.
Your grandmother. Oh, okay.
And she became quite prominent because she got a job on the Crow Indian Reservation and taught school on the Crow Indian Reservation beginning in 1893. She got married to her, she married her husband was a soldier in the Spanish-American War. And if it hadn't ended, he would have commanded this, he would have been a first sergeant in the 2nd Rough Riders, not the 1st Rough Riders. And he was the first sergeant in it, and spends most of his life in the Army. And he will marry my grandmother about 1900. She's much better educated, a graduate of Oberlin, and she is the old boys kept one job in the county for women. County superintendent of schools.
Oh, okay.
So she moved from the teaching school on the Crow Reservation to county superintendent of schools in Yellowstone County.
Well, you've mentioned seeing some empty schools. Why were they empty?
Now, in the summer, one-room schools closed.
Oh, okay.
And the Sarpy school was typical one-room school. Like most one-room schools are, they closed up for the summer. And they usually closed up since, because they generally closed up around always in mid-May. And took up again after Labor Day. That means that the kids go to work on the property. So then my grandmother will be married. They get a rather early divorce, her and her husband, who was basically in the military most of his career life. And my grandmother was county superintendent of schools in Montana, in Yellowstone County.
At one time, I remember you said you went to school with Crow Indians.
Yes. Yes, it's because the Crows and the Cheyennes, the Crows basically went to Crow Agency, which is an Indian school, which you were either half-breed, half-blood, or all the way. And the Cheyennes went to Reindeer. Now the Cheyennes and the Crows and the Lakota don't get along, as you're well apprised of. And the Crows are damn good basketball players. If there were any white boys that were halfway decent, they had a hard time making the basketball team. Because Hardin had usually 7 Crows on the basketball team,
Oh.
and 3 white boys.
Huh.
And the white boys were lucky to be on the team. So so I knew the Crow. The relationship with the Crows and the Whites was very good. The relationship between the Crows and the Cheyennes was bad. Relations between the Crows and the Dakota is terrible.
Yeah.
And the Crows have the best reservation.
Did they?
Yeah, they have half the county, which is 10,000 acres. But Bighorn County is twice as big as the state of Rhode Island.
Gee whiz.
And 1/2 of the population is Crow.
Hmm.
So
Is that still? Are there still a lot of Crows there?
yeah. The Crows now are getting, the Crows since I left Montana now probably hold more than half the offices in the county
Oh.
because they're the most numerous.
Uh-huh.
But the Crows used to vote the way the white man wanted, the way the patron, who they had if they worked for a white man that had a lot of money, they were usually voted the way the white man wanted them to vote.
I see.
So they owned cattle at first. Then in 1920, now when you buy sheep, you buy a band of sheep. Everyone is a ewe. Sheep ewes will have probably 2,000 ewes. Will probably give you will give you almost half their lambs will be bum lambs, which you have to nurse them on the bottle. So you get, if you have 2,000 ewes, you have $150, and you'll end up with a crop of sheep. Your 2,000 sheep will end up being 3,000 sheep very rapidly. And they did reasonably well in 1920. Then, now as I say, as they say, the sheep men make more money. The cattlemen, in their mind, have a higher social prestige.
Mm-hmm. Just like
But social prestige doesn't make you wealthy.
So it's kind of like in the TV show, the Westerns, when the cattlemen and the sheepmen quarrel.
Or not very, because my uncle and his partner owned 36 band of sheep. That's 36,000 ewes.
Gee whiz.
And he was very wealthy, he and his partner. So then they raised, my grandfather raised sheep 1 year, 1920. Then he becomes a cattleman from 1920 to 1930. At that time, he ran about 1,000 head of cattle. And in 1920, he thought he had a wonderful idea. He doesn't know that tractors are coming in. And he buys 350 brood mares and about 10 good Clydesdale and Shire stallions. And he's going to raise horses. Mm-hmm. By 1933, the horses, all they're good for is dog food.
Gee. Now, how old are you while all this is going on?
All right, I was born in 1923.
So you're just a kid.
Yes.
Well,
And I went to Sarpy, which is a one-room school, for the 7th and 8th grade. I went to the 7th and 8th grade. My grandmother was very dominating. I feel sorry, I've always felt sorry somewhat for my mother, because my mother was big into sororities. And if you've been in colleges, the Kappas are one of the major sororities is. And if she hadn't got married, I think she always ruled the day. Because she got married after she got out of her senior year. And she did not get to be the head of the Kappas.
Oh.
Because she had gotten married. Mm-hmm. So they got, my mother and father got married in the spring of 1922. So it's one that, so I was actually born when my mother was about a year, about 18 months old.
Oh.
And so she was stuck with a child then. And my father got sued for breach of promise because there was a woman that thought he was worth more money than he was. And one of the scandals I heard about and had to read from the paper, in the year, it would be the year after I'm married, the local belle sues my father for breach of promise.
Shit. But when was this? You were married already, or?
No, breach of promise, because he'd evidently promised this woman, given her a ring, and then he ends up marrying my mother. And then she sues him breach of promise because my mother sits in the courtroom with me in her lap. Because I'm then about a year, I'm about 14 months old then while he's getting sued for breach of promise.
Oh my, well, who won the case?
He did.
Good. Well,
she had another breach of promise right after him. All right, then she then owns most of the cattle. When her mother dies, her mother was divorced, of course. When her mother dies, she was head of the big player in Indian schools because of the high rate of tuberculosis among American Indians. And she was an important player in that association of tuberculosis, combating tuberculosis, which would be and she always went to the major conventions. And she held that position until she went to the grave, which would be, she died on the 6th day of January 1933.
Why did the Indians tend to get to the TB? What was the problem?
I think it's a part of the inheritance of
the white man.
They're very subject to tuberculosis.
Oh.
And she would go, and I got to travel with her in the summers. In fact, I spent the summer of my when it was in 1930. I spent out in California where she was presiding at a convention out in San
This was your grandmother.
Yes. She was very important in the field of public health.
But you get interested in the Civil War rather early, even though you're out.
All right. I got interested in the Civil War all right, now let's the first grade, she insists that my mother send me to a private school, which I hated naturally. If you're 1 year old, you hate if you're 6 years old, you hate a private school where you have to take naps and all that crap. That's probably why I don't take naps anymore.
Oh.
I never have in my life. And then I then go to Hardin, which is a public school with probably about 400 students altogether through the second, third, and fourth grade, and boarded in town. Then my mother and father moved to Billings because they have another child, my brother, and they moved to Billings, and they live in Billings a year, and then they moved back to the ranch. And then when they moved back to the ranch, I then go to the one-room school in the 7th and 8th grade. And that then that's the one-room school. Had the most they ever had in it was 16 students, and that's from 1 through 8. And they must have been a cold winter in the 4th grade because we had 4 4th graders out of 14 people. So you can see there ain't very many.
No.
And we made the poor teacher play baseball with us. And that's what we played during the noon hour.
Mm-hmm.
Then finally in 1940, my father got wise and bought a band of sheep again. Because my mother owned all the cattle on the ranch.
So
She'd been left the money by her mother.
You're reading
Her mother died in 1933. And that's why I got to go, and my grandmother had been to the Columbian Exposition in 1994. And she had decided she's going to take the whole family to the Century of Progress in 1933. And that's why I get to see the All-Star Game in 1933. And I get to see it because my grandmother had endowed the purchase of a car, a family car, and the cost of the trip to and from the World's Fair, because she remembered her experience with the Columbian Exposition, which was in '94. And that's where when I'm talking to a real baseball fan, he said, "You went to the first All-Star game?" I said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "Well, how old were you when you went?" And I said, "I'm 8 years old. I'm 8 years old, going on 9 years old." So this is Larry Gibbs. You know him?
I don't think
Was
so.
the show around everything. Well, he says, I bet you're the only person alive that saw the first All-Star game. And they turned it over to the insurance actuary, and he said, a boy that is 9 years old, going on 8 years old, going on 9 years old, and their average number going of children to a baseball game, I think is 600. He's undoubtedly the only person alive that saw the first All-Star game. That's going on actuaries. And so I went to the first All-Star game. I went to the game this year.
This was held in Washington, correct?
Yeah, that's how I got. Now, how I got the ticket, my grandmother and grandfather were close personal friends of Kennesaw Mountain Landis. So good they called him Ken.
He was
The baseball commissioner at the first baseball and the first All-Star game. And that's where my father got the tickets from. 2 tickets he had. And they were undoubtedly the worst in Comiskey Stadium. Because you couldn't see Babe Ruth except when he hit a home run and circled the bases. Because he was playing right field.
You couldn't see all the stars.
No.
But you recently went to an All-Star game, right?
Yeah. So they come up with it. The researchers, actuaries said that a person that's going on his 9th year is undoubtedly, because of the wars and everything, 1933 is probably the only one. Actuary, if we were insuring you, we would insure you as an adult.
Well, shifting from baseball to the Civil War, which has been your life. But how do you get interested in the Civil War?
All right, I was initially interested in antiquity. And when I were going to the Sarpy school, my father liked to read out loud. And he liked to read books he liked. It didn't make any difference if we liked them. But fortunately, that's where it was captured by the Civil War, because he read mainly he read it because it's by a Marine Corps historian.
Thompson?
Huh?
Thompson?
Thompson. He knew Thompson.
Oh, he did.
So that's why he read Jeb Stuart to me, because Thompson wrote Jeb Stuart, and that captured me.
How does that book rate with you?
Well, I thought it was good. It had no effect on my brother, who is 3 years younger than I am. It had a lot of effect on me because it got me interested in the Civil War. And by the time I'm by 1930, I'm reading adult books like Sherman Fighting Prophet and others. In fact, I read Lee's Lieutenants when I was in the hospital.
Oh, you did.
And I found out someone more important than me read it. Because according to subsequent biographer of Stuart, is Chesty Puller read.
Famous Chesty Puller.
He read that book. Read that book when his wife gave it to him at Christmas time, which is between Peleliu and Okinawa.
Well, from being raised on a ranch and then getting your first spark of interest in the Civil War by reading books and all, we shift to the Marine Corps.
Yes.
You joined the Marine Corps. You were in some heavy fighting in the Pacific.
Yes,
you were seriously wounded.
Well, I was listening. I did not ever know Mike very well. You know them. You know their positive things well.
No,
But Mike was not
hiking Mike, right?
That's the. He ends up a brigadier general in the Marine Corps.
Okay.
And commands an army brigade in in World War I. He commands a brigade of Connecticut troops. He's very highly of in Connecticut because he took over because Marshall did not like General Edwards. Marshall got rid of every National Guard division commander except one. And that's the commander of the Ohio National Guard. And he got rid of Edwards because Mike was served with the big man in the Philippine insurrection, and the big man is John J. Pershing.
Oh yeah.
Because he requested about 5 Marine officers after Belleau Wood, because the Marines had too many colonels and not enough battalions for a colonel to command. So Pershing transferred him to the Connecticut National Guard, because Pershing did not think much of the National Guard, and he knew Mike pretty well.
So you joined the Marine Corps and went to boot camp in San Diego.
Yes.
So you were a Hollywood Marine.
Yes, I was. Now, what I like to rub it into are some of our historians. In 1941, I bought a bus ticket and came from Montana. And where do I end up? In the Shenandoah Valley.
I remember you told me.
Many years before, I was in the Shenandoah Valley in September 1941, and I hitchhiked up and down. The valley.
Oh wow!
And I like to tell Bob Crick, I was in the Shenandoah Valley when you were a trickle in your father's eye. And I like to tell Dennis the same thing, because I spent the period of 41 from September until it was getting cold in October, hitchhiking around the Shenandoah Valley.
Well, you got a feel for the lay of the land.
Yes.
And everything.
And I like to tell all the our friends who think they were at the Shenandoah Valley before me, but they weren't.
When I was a kid,
Because Bob Crick came out of his mother's womb in 1938.
you did.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So that's where I got interested, and when it got cold, I simply called my. I knew my father would be pissed off because I wasn't on the ranch during the summer, but mothers are always sympathetic to their older sons. Mm-hmm. So I called my mother up and called her and said, I need some money to come home on. So I rode a bus back to Montana because by the early October it's getting cold and you don't like to stand on the street and on the highway and signal with your thumb.
So you went back home. Then when did you join the Marine Corps?
I was listening to the Bear Cardinal game on December 7th, 1941, and I was pissed off because the Monsters of the Midway were behind, and the Cardinals didn't win very often. So I went in and reported, because my father liked sports, and we lived in a rural area, and he put in an aerial that was 3/4 of a mile in length. Why? So he could pick up the 2,500 watt station.
That's amazing.
Because we used to listen to Dutch Reagan back in 1938.
Did you?
When he was out of WHO Des Moines.
Wow.
So I was listening to the game, and they interrupted and said, as we're going into the half, and said the Japanese are bombing Pearl Harbor. So I immediately went out where the folks were eating Sunday dinner, and they usually had, since there were higher economic scale than a number of our neighbors, they generally had neighbors over eating, like in a rural area, and told them they were bombing Pearl Harbor. Well, when I turned the radio on that evening, the Japanese have caught our Air Force. MacArthur's Air Force is caught on the ground.
At Clark Field.
At Clark Field. And then I told them, I went out and informed them, I think I've got bad news, I got good news, I said I've got bad news for you. Now, at this time, this is 1941. In 41, I am not 18 years old yet.
Oh.
So I go and inform my parents, I'm out of here tomorrow. And they said, no, you won't be out of here tomorrow, because we've got to sign your papers, because the Selective Service cannot take you when you're 18.
Was it 18 or 17?
Huh?
18 or 17?
18.
18.
You become eligible. I become eligible on June 30th when I go 17 years old, and they wouldn't have anything to say about it.
Mm-hmm.
But up between that day, between the day after Pearl Harbor and June, and the first day and the 26th day of June, they damn sure can keep me enjoying the Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm.
So I told them, let's cut a deal. They said, we'll cut a deal. Now, we want to go we've been working hard for the last couple of years, and we undoubtedly will have to be working harder during the next few years. And if you want to go to New Orleans, where we ended up, I said after about 9 days at sea, we arrived in Tutuila, American Samoa. We had to drop off a member of the crew who had an appendicitis and the mail. And then we proceeded that afternoon to Western Samoa, where we will where the where I joined we joined the rest of the Double Deuce.
The 22nd Marines.
What?
The 22nd Marines.
The 22nd.
So you're in the Marine Corps now.
Yeah.
You had to work a little bit to get your parents to sign for you.
Yeah.
And now you're ending up in Samoa.
Samoa, and we end up in British Samoa, and we'll remain in British Samoa from around the first day of August to Christmas Day of 1943, and during most of that time, since special forces were a big thing at that time, and they're not particularly that had a big thing with the hierarchy in the Marine Corps. The hierarchy in the Marine Corps is not very enthused with the 1st Raider Battalion and their lack of any interest in the 2nd Raider Battalion. The 3rd Raider Battalion was beginning to talk like they were going on the same route the 2nd Raider Battalion was, in which you were organized by teams. But within 2 weeks, we learned we're going to be under more in the mainstream of the Marine Corps.
Not as irregular.
Yeah, that's the 3rd Raider Battalion, and our battalion commander is Colonel Liversedge. Now, Colonel Liversedge was a giant of a man. He was he won the hammer throw in the Olympics in the year 2000, in the year 1990, and
or
1920.
20.
He won the hammer throw, so he's a big man. His assistant was Colonel Yatton, who was just the opposite. He was a short, chubby man, and their mission was to make us more like the average Marine Corps regiment. Maybe we could have lead us, but we're not going to go into any of this gung-ho baloney.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the guys were a little miffed at that, but we spend a lot of jungle, a lot of hiking, firing the range in British Samoa. Evidently, one of the senior officers must have been a Robert Louis Stevenson fan, because Robert Louis Stevenson is buried on a high mountain just as you come into Apia Harbor, and he was of the opinion that would be a good place to hike to enlighten us better. So we did a lot of rather long hikes, but we were following closely what is happening in Guadalcanal, because Guadalcanal is moving toward the Battle of the Ridge, which is the 12th day of September. Our Navy is beginning to assert itself. We're facing much heavier losses on Japanese forces, and on Christmas Day, we are transferred back to American Samoa. So why were we sent back there? They organized one battalion of the 3rd Marine Raiders, are organized in what would be French Samoa, known as Wallis Island. That would be E Company. Then C Company and B Company are organized in British Samoa. And that would be that would be 2 companies. and then they organize a headquarters company, and a company are organized in American Samoa. 23rd day of December 1942, the 3rd Raider Battalion will all assemble in American Samoa. The ones coming, E Company coming from Wallis Island or French Samoa, 2 companies, E and C and B coming from British Samoa, and the other units from American Samoa. And the one thing I can remember well, we had a guy in our unit who used to be a punching bag for Buddy Bear. George Wright.
Is that Max Bear's brother?
That's Max Bear's brother. He was a punching bag.
And that's the uncle of Jethro on the Beverly
Yes.
Hillbillies.
And he got terrible drunk. And everybody gets drunk on Christmas Eve. And poor Punchy Wright gets so damn drunk that he has a native row him out in a native boat, a pow-pow. And while everybody sits and stands on the rail and laughs, the poor bastard all but drowns.
Did he drown?
No, he does not. And so we're now in American Samoa. We'll arrive on Christmas Day, and on the 4th week of January of the new year, which is 43, we are going to go to the Solomons. Now, by this time, the 1st Marine Division with the attached 2nd Marine Division are being pulled off Guadalcanal. We are being replaced by units of the United States Army. The North Dakota National Guard and the Tropical Lightning Division, which is a regular army, are replacing the Marines, and they will also pick up the 6th Marines.
Well, how effective are National Guard units?
The North Dakota National Guard is very effective because they're the first unit that show up on Guadalcanal that are armed with M1s.
Oh. Okay.
And they arrive at the same time as the Battle of the Ridge, which is the 12th and 13th day of September. And the Marines are impressed with the M1.
Now the Marines,
and if the Army isn't very careful, you're going to probably have your M1 stolen from you.
And
this is North Dakota National. The Army is being punished in a way because they oppose the use of the M1 for the Johnson weapon.
Are they carrying Springfields?
No, they were carrying M1s. They're the first.
Well, I mean the other troops. Did they have 03 Springfields?
The other troops now, the Marines are still armed with 03s until the North Dakota National Guard, the 154th Regiment, arrives, and the Marines get pretty much impressed with the M1, particularly during the Battle of the Ridge, when they shoot the daylights out of the Japanese. And so the Army is now taking over. And we've taken very heavy losses on naval operations, but now it is turning. And the 1st Marine Division is going to be the first unit to be pulled off Guadalcanal. They will be sent first to Brisbane, Australia, and then to Melbourne, Australia. Now so they are making the switch from the Army to the Navy. The tide has definitely turned. By the 8th day of January, the Japanese are pretty well gone from Guadalcanal, being withdrawn by way of Russell Island to New Georgia.
New Georgia, okay.
So the Raiders get their one crack of action. We go to Russell Island, and we land in the rubber boats. And the rubber boats were known in the Marine Corps as the condom Navy. As you know, in the Marine Corps, they call them condoms. They don't call them condoms in the Marine Corps. So we spend 3 weeks in the Russell Islands.
Oh,
That's the first combat we see, but it's not the vicious kind. It's from Japanese air attacks.
oh, okay.
Then we are pulled off, the 3rd Raider Battalion are pulled off Guadalcanal, off the Russell Islands, and transferred back to Espiritu Santo. Now the United States find out they've made a big mistake. They should not have used Espiritu Santo and Samoa as a place to train men in jungle warfare, because they find that filariasis is broken out in all the units that are trained in Samoa and Espiritu Santo.
So what broke out?
What will turn filariasis, which is preliminary stage of elephantiasis.
Gee whiz.
So everybody has to go in for a short arm inspection, in which they feel your lymph nodes, and we lose almost a third of our men
Gee whiz.
who have filariasis, which is the preliminary of elephantiasis. So that means that if someone has made a big, big mistake, because that's happened to other troops that train in Samoa and the New Hebrides, and we lost. I'm lucky I did not come down with it, but I had to. But I came down with malaria and yellow jaundice,
Oh my.
and so along on the end of April, I get a big break. Everybody that has malaria and yellow jaundice. Now, if you had filariasis, you're coming back to the United States.
Oh.
And when you arrive at Mare Island, you are then sent up to Crater Lake, where they send all the Marines who have fistulas in their lymph nodes, because that's going to be the treatment of getting them out of the tropic environment. This is something that the medics would have been much better off if they knew that before they use those areas as training areas. So I'm in New Zealand, and with a number of other men with malaria and yellow jaundice. I found out it has a lasting effect on you, because when I tried to give a blood transfusion one day, I got reamed out because I've had malaria and yellow jaundice.
Wow.
So we spend about 2 weeks, I spend till the beginning of June in a hospital in Auckland, New Zealand, at Ellerslie, which is a horse racing place. And it's then back to New Caledonia, because the Raider Battalion, my unit I'm assigned to, has been transferred to New Caledonia. And then I go to casual company when I come back from New Zealand, and since I knew a bunch of guys in the 7th Marines, and I knew they were in Australia, I tell them, where do you want to go? And I said, I want to go to the 7th Marines, because I've been in the 7th Marines for a while. And I go back to the 7th Marines, and I'm transferred to Melbourne, Australia, and on the mid-July 1943, I go to the Sergeant Major of the 1st Marine Division And he asked me what unit I want to go to. And I said, well, I know a lot of guys in the 7th Marines. So he puts me in the 7th Marines. So I spend the next 2 months in Mount Martha, which is now a high-end residence for wealthy Australians. And on the last week in September 1943, the 1st Marine Division is transferred by convoy on Liberty ships from Melbourne, Australia to Oro Bay, New Guinea. So I'm in New Guinea now. And that's where we're going to remain. Now, we are going to be, we are now part of the 5th Army. We're now part of the Army. We're under MacArthur's command. So we are in Oro Bay. We're part of the of General Kruger's army. General Kruger was a private in the United States Army in World War I. And he cannot be sent to Germany to fight because he'd be fighting against the Germans again. So the decision is made that we're going to come into Operation Cartwheel. They're going to bypass a landing on Rabaul. We're going to seize air bases on Western New Guinea, Western New Britain.
Wasn't that part of one of MacArthur's
Operation Cartwheel?
He avoided some places and kept on going.
Yeah. So we're now in part of the 5th Army, and we have practice landings, and we are scheduled to be part of Operation Cartwheel, which will involve an occupation of Cape Gloucester, which is the westernmost point on the island of New Britain, to seize the air base there and be ready to jump to, we don't know now, probably to the Admiralty Islands. That's as MacArthur's campaign is going on bypassing Japanese strongholds. They're now neutralizing Rabaul, so they're not going to go to Rabaul. And the best thing when we on the 24th, on the 23rd day of December, the 7th Marines go aboard LCIs and APDs, which are 4 Stacker destroyers that have have the boiler rooms removed and carry 4 Higgins boats. And we were scheduled, and we will land on Cape Gloucester, New Britain, on Christmas Day, if you're on this side of the international date line. Wow. If you're on the other side, it's on the 24th, which is a big problem if you get shot and killed, because you're going to be killed. The guys that are killed on the second day of the new year will be all listed as killed on the 3rd day of January. Now we see the best ship, the best movie you can see. We see James Cagney in Yankee Doodle Dandy.
Oh, yeah.
And if you don't want to kill Japanese, and the next morning you have something wrong with your hormones. And you get your steak and eggs for breakfast.
Oh, that's good.
And we've also started getting replacements in. And we are going to land on Gloucester on the 26th day of December and move inland. The landing is generally fairly easy as we get ashore, except you find out some of the replacements aren't very well trained. If you're a real fuck up, you can be the smartest man you're going to be, If you're a real fuck up, your squad leader is going to make sure you stay in camp when you take the field. So we have come ashore. We push in. The 1st Marines break off and move up the shore to secure the Cape Gloucester airstrips. And we are to do, the 7th Marines, that's the 1st Marines doing that. And the 7th Marines are to swing and move eastward along the northern shore of New Britain to knock out Japanese barge depots. So we received some replacements in, and I'm now in Company L, 7th Marines, commanded by Captain Moran. My platoon leader is A.B. Gardner, who is a Mustang, having come up from the ranks. My squad leader is Phil Kennedy. And our gunnery sergeant is the former company barber, John Mitorelli. And our mission this day...
Excuse me.
Huh?
I'm sorry, I'm coughing.
Our mission this day is to join with the 5th Marine, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. And we're going to form a skirmish line that is probably almost a mile in length. We'll rest our left flank on the perimeter. This is the perimeter that we've seized on the first day. And we're to press forward, resting the left on the perimeter, and push forward on a pivot, anchoring eventually hoping to reach Target Hill. Now we are on the extreme left. That would be Company L, 7th Marines. At that day, Kennedy is a good squad leader, and he has a real jerk. We have 2 real jerks in our squad. The worst jerk, we don't realize how bad he is. He's a fellow named Thornbloom, who had flunked out of officers' training school, and 2 weeks before we go to Gloucester, he lays on this company street and cries that he's too young to die. He's already washed out of OCS. Now poor Mackenzie, who's on my right, big husky guy, he comes in and tells us what a bunch of horrible people we are, treating a man the way we are. This guy that's laying on the ground, whining that he's too young to die. Then we have a guy named Napper, who is a replacement, who I had to who is not very bright. When he takes a crap, he goes out in front of a double apron barbed wire. So if the Japanese are out there, he's think to be killed. So what we're going to be advancing, we are on the extreme left, with our leftmost man on the edge of the perimeter. And we have our normal breakfast, if you're going to be in combat, is steak and eggs. And we move off. Now the jungle is mostly upper story. That means there's very little jungle on the ground. And we've been out there where the Japanese are. Now the Japanese are dug in behind a stream that is at right angles to us if we're advancing in a line of battle, which is probably a mile, 3/4 of a mile in width. We got forward, and suddenly we come very level almost no jungle close to the ground, but a heavy heavy upper canopy. And we come to a creek. Now the creek is about as wide. We come to a ravine, and it's about as wide as as from my front porch here to the street on the other side. And I and my partner in crime, Sackstetter, who was also a scout, we look across and we can see Japanese. We see several Japanese standing on the other side. Now on the other side, they're almost the same level we are. If you took a plumb bob right here and strung a wire over to you, and I dropped the plumb bob down, it dropped down about 10 yards and hit a stream. You follow me? Mm. And I tell Sackstetter, I think I see some friends over there. And we check with Kennedy, who is our squad leader, and we say, should we open fire? And we're moving in a skirmish line, probably about 3 yards between each man in the squad, in the skirmish line. On my left, about 3 yards, will be Sackstetter. On Sackstetter's left will be Vito Percoco, who's the most typical Italian I've ever seen. Long hair, we call him a Chiliano, and he's with the ex-company barber, who's been the right time at the right place, and he's now the gunnery sergeant. Now on their left is going to be Silcox, who's a West Virginia hillbilly. Our 2 BAR men are on the level ground, because the ground is as flat as a billiard table, and then drops off at about a 45-degree into the slope that will carry you down in the creek. And as we start down, the Japanese have a machine gun dug into the other bank in a pillbox, about 30 yards to its left. Now say this is my left, but about 30 yards to the right of that machine gun is another machine gun in a pillbox, and then another one down. So we start down, and moving down, and they open fire. Now our BAR men, the Japanese are pretty good. They evidently know what a BAR is, because the BAR men, Hughes and Speed, are on the level ground above Sackstetter and myself, along with the machine gun squad. And the Japanese open up. The first guy they hit is going to be Silcox. Silcox is about, say 10 yards to my left. He's hit through the right arm and he started down the slope, and he's heading to the rear. The next guy they're going to hit is about 4 yards to Silcox's right, is going to be Gunnery Sergeant Vitarelli. They're going to hit his carbine, shatter his carbine, and he's going to end up with a bunch of fragments of the carbine. And they're going to shoot Percoco, who is laying down, in the wrist and in the hand. He is about 5 yards to my left, and he targets for the rear, spurting blood over people. Now I think they've already killed the 2 BAR men and knocked out the machine gun. And then they traverse, after shooting Percoco, and hit Sackstetter. Sackstetter is hit between the thigh There goes your hip bone and your knee. So he has two bad wounds in his upper leg. They're shooting at us with a Hotchkiss type gun. That's the one that looks like they call a woodpecker. It is a German machine gun from WW1. It's 7.5, and it fires rather slow, which is going to make the reason that I'm live and talking to you. Yet, wham! After it hits Sackstetter, it's going to. I'm sitting on my keister, about four yards down from the level ground. And I've been shooting at the Japanese, and swat, that's when I get hit in the elbow. Then, fortunately, it's a what they call a woodpecker, very slow rate of fire. It goes whoop, whoop, whoop. If it went like a Nambu, it would go whoop, and I wouldn't be talking to you, because the next shot would have hit me right in the center of the chest. The second shot hits me in the pointer on my right shoulder, shatters my right, shatters the right head of the humerus and my right shoulder, and I can see the bullet hole there, and the bullet is going to stay inside my rib cage, fortunately, and lodge between my 6th and 7th rib, and will have to be taken out by surgery. And I go down. The next guy to my right is Gordon, and he isn't hit. And then they'll start working over the 2nd platoon, headed by Big John Rokas. Then I lay there for about maybe an hour, and then Sackstetter says, Ed, can you, because my helmet had gone down over my eyes. And as Sackstetter says, I can't use my legs, and you can't use your arms, so let's work together and see if you can use your legs to supplement my arms and see if we can get out of here another way. And we start to do it, and then the sons of bitches open the fire again. And they're going to hit me the next time, because I'm laying on my belly. They're going to shoot the left side of my heel off, and put a big grazing wound about 6 inches in length and 1 inch wide across my left cheek of my ass. Then I decide I'd better get out of there. And I finally tell Gordon, use your rifle and see if you can use hold it at the small of the stock and see if you can knock my helmet up so I can see where I'm going. So then I get up on my knees, and I walk on my knees up about 5 yards, gaining about 2 feet, where then the sons of bitches open up fire on me again, but they can't depress their gun enough. And Hartman and O'Leary, the machine gun squad leader, and Hartman crawl up, pushing themselves with their toes, and push themselves forward about 15 yards. And they come up and tap me on my feet. And they say, where are you hit? And Hartman says, have you used your Siret Siret? And I said, no, how am I going to use my Siret when I can't use either arm? So then he gives me about 2 shots of morphine in the gut. And then they say, we're going to get you out of here. So this time they'll crawl to the rear using their toes, digging them in and pulling that way. Because when they got me out, they used their 2 toes to push them forward. And so in about 5 minutes, I'm back there at the aid station. In 10 minutes, I'm on a stretcher in the aid station. I'm on a stretcher, and they've driven two bait-headed rifles in the ground and hung glucose from each one of them, a bottle of glucose, and they're giving them. But they say, we can't give them to you because your veins are collapsing. So they cut me here and insert the needle into the vein directly. And then they say, are you shot anyplace else? And I say, yes, I'm shot in the heel. The guy, Corvick, said, my heel? And he says, no, you're not. I said, well, lift my left foot up as I'm laying on my back. And you'll see the left side of my shoe is shot off. So he then allows that. Next thing he does is sticks a cigarette in my mouth, and I don't smoke. I inform him I don't smoke, Mac. And in about 15 minutes, they've used up the glucose, because they're not going to give you whole blood till you get to the aid station. They only give you glucose at the aid station. So in about an hour, I'm back in the aid station. I'm now attired in the same thing I came into the earth on, nude, naked. And they begin cleaning me up. This is where they'll give me my first whole blood transfusion. They'll also pack my wounds with Vaseline gauze, because they want the wound to heal from the inside out. So I'm there about an hour. I'm as naked as a jaybird. I'll have to describe the Japanese propaganda pamphlets they got from me, but I'll use that at the end of the conversation. So the corpsmen end up with that. And then I go into the sick bay. And we all lay in the sick bay on a stretcher. You've got a guy about 2 yards to your left, 2 yards to your right. And O'Connor would come by every day and give us a report. Who's been killed, who's been wounded. And the best news he ever gives us, he says, Puller came up and he told our colonel, you're going to the beach. I'm relieving you. And you can go to the beach, and I'm taking over the battalion, and I'm going to get them out of here. So he goes and gets 2 Sherman tanks, gets the engineers to fabricate dozer blades to the head of to the front of the boat, the Sherman tank, and the next day they break the Japanese line. And I'm now ready to go into a long period. In 2 days, they'll put 400 of us in the tank deck of a LST, send us to a vac hospital down at Oro Bay. The Navy does a big oral history with me. They said, how was it down in that tank then? And I said, it smells and blood stinks worse than anything I've ever seen. And that goes into another story of 27 months in the hospital. So that was my day of destiny, you might say. Or going to become an amputee, go there. So in comes the doctor to talk to me along with the chaplain, and he says, well, right now I have a cast beginning at my belly button, coming up to my Adam's apple, and fixing my arm this way, and this arm this way. And he said, well, we're going to discuss your future. Now we can try a bone graft on you. Take an 8.5 inch of bone off your tibia, put it in your left arm, or we can amputate your left arm. And I said, well, let's gamble on saving my left arm. And that was the decision they made. So that does and I will have spent, And then finally on the 15th day of April, still 15th day of March, 1944 or 1945, I'm discharged from the United States Marine Corps. They have two bills you can use. You can use the GI Bill, which will give you, if you lose an arm, which would give me probably 95% disabled. Or I could put in for Public Law 16. That was better yet. Now, if I told the consular I want a PhD in history, or if I wanted a doctor, if I wanted to be a doctor, it would pay you all the way to becoming a doctor. It was much better than Public Law 16 was done at the time of World War I. And that's to give you a productive experience if you're out. So if I said I wanted to be a doctor, they would have paid my way to medical school and doctor's training. If I wanted to be a PhD, they would have paid for me to get a PhD, piled high deep. But I didn't, so I went on Public Law. I went on the GI Bill, not Public Law 16. So then I get out, discharged from the hospital the 16th day of March, 1945, and I'm discharged from the Marine Corps on the 15th day of April of that year. I went to grad school, undergrad school at Georgetown, grad school at Indiana. I entered on duty with the Park Service as a park historian at Vicksburg in 1966. And the rest is a story. Now, most important motion is when I become chief historian of the Park Service, I work hard. I get along with, I'm well informed, and I probably had more influence than anybody in the Park Service on getting the American Battlefield Protection Program enacted into law, because I could go talk to Lujan as long as I let Rogers, my boss, know about it, and I could talk, and I had George Hartzog on my side. So needless to say, I have a good career. I become chief historian of the Park Service. The most important thing as chief historian of the Park Service is the enactment of the American Battlefield Protection Program. The guy I don't get along with this guy is the last director we have. I work under. I was warned he's very jealous of you. This is Kennedy, because you have more influence with Mr. Bumpers and Mr. Lujan than he does.
So going from there, how did you transfer and go from, the chief historian and your aspects of the Civil War history to becoming the Ed Bars that everybody knows today?
Well, I did that because I was historian at Vicksburg National Military Park. Then when they come in with Mission 66 on the 50th anniversary of the Park Service and the Civil War program of commemorating the 100th anniversary of World War II, I get transferred and I become regional historian in charge of making sure that they have all the Mission 66 documents in place, all the planning documents in place by a certain date, because I have and that gives me on an extra level as a park historian. In fact, what I like to do is stick it up the regional offices when I have that job, and come down on the side of the park. Because I believe this, because as I got older, I realized the regional office is as worthless as tits on a boar hog. And most of the people in the regional office have failed at the parks.
So, looking at the parks, then, what would you say are the best preserved and your favorite parks that you worked with?
All right. Now, I make it a point to get along with the park historians, whether it's Ted Alexander or Scott or them. As you know, I always used to come in and go to the desk right off. I found out to get along with the parks, get along with the people that deal with the public. And that's what I was looking at, as kind of the salesman to the public for the Park Service in general. And evidently satisfied both Senator Bumpers and Manuel Lujan that I'm pretty good. Now, what happens to Lujan? Now, this is at the time of the big flap down at Manassas. And Lujan calls up Rogers, and he says, I don't really know that much about the Civil War. And he says, could you send Ed Barse over to tell me why the Civil War is important? And he says, and Rogers says, you'll probably be over there 30 minutes. So I go over to Lujan's office. At the end of an hour, this is the important part, Lujan says, can you come back next week? So I says, if Rogers says yes, I'll be back there next week. So Rogers is not jealous of me, where Kennedy would have said, no, I won't let you come in and go there. So I go back the next week. 1 hour. Lujan has his wife and children there. The next week, another hour. All the bureau chiefs are there. So in essence, I sold the Civil War to Lujan in what would be a freshman course in college as Civil War 101. And I also, the congressman liked me, because when you testify before Congress, all of them sit there and read. And I practiced the first time I went to speak to the Rotary Club, and after I've been talking to an hour, everybody's gone. And I never wrote a speech out again. I talked from the heart. When I finished testimony, the finance chairman of the Park Service for New Mexico requested me to come talk to he says, I hear you, Mr. Vedos says you don't read. He says, I understand you talk off the cuff. So I spoke to him, and he got up and applauded. He says, that's the first decent testimony I've heard in this session of Congress. And it's simply using my memory and talking, researching the members of the committee who have certain interests, and that's why he said that. This is the best testimony I've heard in this session of Congress.
Well, talking about that a little bit, when was it you first realized that you had that kind of memory where you could just recall facts and figures without having to have a bunch of notes?
I knew it very early in life. I learned in it probably the best lesson I ever learned when I was park historian at Vicksburg. And all those people in the Rotary Club walked out on me, and they didn't come back. I thought maybe they were going to the toilet, but they weren't going to the. They were walking out. So then I just started talking from the cuff.
So, during that time, I believe you were also called to assist LBJ in some matters.
Yes.
How did that occur?
Yes, I was. I had a. All right, now LBJ wanted to get his grandfather's homestead down in Texas. I had been sent down to LBJ when he authorized it as a step backwards. When Senator Hatfield of Oregon is in the Congress, he introduces legislation that every president, regardless of whether you like him or not, are nationally significant. So I think we should have a historic site for every president. Now, granted, we're not talking about the White House because we don't want to get in a big turf battle. So that's what I started off there. Lujan's predecessor had me come and talk to his staff meeting every week if he was there. And if he's there, all the bureau chiefs are there.
So when you went to the LBJ Ranch, how long were you there, and what was your role there?
I was there at his beck and call, probably a total, because now LBJ had 2 heart attacks. The first one was on a 4th of July weekend of the year 2005. Evidently at that time his doctor told him, boy, you better give up drinking and smoking. His next heart attack he has is on Easter Sunday, Easter Sunday, 1972. And this time I think they tell him, you ain't got long to live. Because I'd been down there and I'd done a report. And it was 100 and I write generally, if I'm writing a report, I have to print it because my scribble is so bad. And I'm very worried because the call comes in from Hartzog. And Hartzog was a tough taskmaster. And he calls up and he said, Bars, where is that report that the manager of the Nervous Center said you had completed? And I said, yes, I completed it 6 months ago. And it's been waiting to get typed, and it's waiting on his desk. And and so Hartzog immediately called up the Denver Service Center director, and he says, I want that, you put all your typists you've got on that, and I want that report, that 15-page report, single space, done this weekend. And I don't care how you do it. And he evidently probably told him, if you don't do it, you're going to Tuesday Goot. Because that's where I figured I was going then. So I get a call from Hartzog, and he says, you're off the shit. You're not going to Tuesday Goot. My director of the Denver Service Center will be going to Tuesday Goot if I don't have 40 copies of that report on my desk to send to the president next weekend. So that's what I did, and then I knew that Johnson was very interested in his grandfather's property. And I knew from gossip with Garvey, who was head of the National Park Service Foundation, that Johnson tried to buy his grandfather's 59-acre tract of land on his last day in office, on his last Monday's office. He negotiated with Mr. Bruckner, who owned the property, and didn't get even invited in. So I went to Garvey and I said, why don't you go talk to the president and see if he'll put an X number of dollars in escrow to buy grandfather's ranch. And that's what happened. He put $150,000 in escrow to buy grandfather's ranch, and Dick Stanton, who could sell an Eskimo ice box, said, I'm going to get that money I'm going to save the president $8,000. He's going to save this millionaire $8,000. And he does it. And it was as good as his boast. So we ended up buying the property.
So how long did you spend there in setting everything up?
Well, spent altogether in the last year of his life that I was dealing with him in the period between 1972 and the fourth week of January 1974. I probably spent in here. I always spent, probably at the ranch, I probably spent, which would be, you can figure up from June of one year to January of the next. Probably I spent either at the ranch or at the park headquarters, probably 6 months.
Okay.
Doing different things like this for the president.
What was it like? You've met 3 presidents and worked with 3 presidents.
Well, I thought it was very, well, I would be, I thought it was real pleasure, because now Johnson in 1972 is a non-person at the Democratic Convention, which is being held in Chicago. So when Stanton and I come back from the nursing home, where Stanton had offered Bruckner, he would buy Bruckner's property for $8,000 less than the president had authorized him. The president went into an orgasm because he's saving $8,000. And then Stanton called up Hartzog and got him out of the shower. And then I figured he better damn sure have it, because it was just conversation and looking at the guy's eyes. And then he called Hartzog, and 2 weeks later, Bruckner said, I'll take the offer, which was $142,000, when he was authorized to pay $150,000.
Okay. In looking at dealing with the presidents, you've dealt with LBJ, but there was a couple other presidents that you dealt with. Can you briefly talk a little bit about them?
Jimmy Carter I found very interesting, and I thought if he was as good on television as he was in doing oral history projects, he would probably run office again, because he was a much more lively person in talking. Now, when we went down to do oral history with him, we did both oral and video, and we went in there, and he hadn't told his wife that we were coming. And he and his wife have a good argument right in front of us, because the audio people are about 5 then. There's just me and like you doing an oral, because it takes more people to do a video than it does an oral. And Jimmy's wife comes in and she's pissed off as hell, because she says, why didn't you invite me to this? Well, what am I and the girls going to do? In other words, what are you going to give the federal government? And he says in a real nasty way, you'll be taken care of.
What about who was the next president you've had to work with or dealt with? I think you met. Was it Bush?
Who?
Bush was the next president you
Yes,
worked.
that was just a shake hand.
That was just to shake hands.
Yeah, it was a shake. That was just a shake hands.
Okay.
But I also, whereas it was Johnson, I was with Bush. I was with our good Baptist. I was probably with him about probably on projects for him for about a month. Probably 6 of the time I was with LBJ.
Okay. What was your favorite job and favorite aspect of working in the Park Service?
Dealing with the public. Dealing with the public and telling them how important these historic sites are.
Okay.
Because I really feel I was contributing something. And particularly on the American Battlefield Protection Program, when I got bumpers and Benno to fund it and the secretary to approve it. Because I got a bunch of I got a team in there, both park and non-park people, and I pretty well picked the park people I wanted there to come up with the American Battlefield Protection Program. I always believed I was not a great respecter of the regional offices. Little Rock, Arkansas, 1962. It's an overview of the Civil War in Mississippi. It was published for the Civil War Centennial Commission. I outside of having pride in finally writing a book, I would say it's probably not my most important book. I would think it was funded and financed by the Mississippi Commission on the War Between the States. And it was a general history, and I had to have it pretty much in addressing them, paying more attention to geography than significance around the state of Mississippi. Having at least something about each congressional district. So it would be, Rebel victory of Vicksburg was very popular because everybody wondered what it was. And that's the naval attack on Vicksburg, in which the Confederates do quite well, particularly with Arkansas. So that was a conversation piece. And then Hard Luck Ironclad is a book on discovery and resurrection of Cairo. It's probably, if you're into archaeology and things like that, probably it's an important book. But as I say, if you're using it as a handbook for archaeology, I would not. It takes a lot of shots because we are not as careful with preservation as we are with discovery. But it gets attention. All right, Battle of Cowpens, it would be the basic data report on the Battle of Cowpens, like you would have up at Antietam. Only Revolutionary War doesn't really it supported the enlargement of the park from a half an acre to over 100 acres. So it did some good for the Park Service. Steele's retreat from Camden and the Battle of Jenkins Ferry. That was a pup piece if you're interested in the Battle of Jenkins Ferry. Fort Smith, Little Gibraltar on the Arkansas, that was published by a university press, which indicates they think it has some value. I think it was the first one that got published in which it's refereed. First, the Battle of Wilson's Creek. That's again just like the one that I did on cow pens, like a basic data set. Forces at Bryce's Crossroads. You always got a winner if you ride on Forrest, particularly with the Confederate constituency.
That's my favorite of your books.
Yeah.
Because you cover
Protecting Sherman's Lifeline, the Battle of Bryce's Crossroads, well, that's Forrest. Battle of Five Forks is a basic data set for the park. It has troop movement maps and a brief and an overview of the battle. The 3-volume Vicksburg is probably considered the best book on the Battle of Vicksburg. It's in those 3 big volumes there. I worked on it 3 years. Practically, I worked on it 5 years. So it tells you more than any other book will tell you about Vicksburg. Fort Manassas Battlefield Study, that's again a basic data set for the First Battle of Manassas. River of Lost Alternatives, that deals with war on the James River. Then with Jay Wirtz, I did a book on Smithsonian Great Battles and Battlefields of the Civil War again. Then a book's edited, Southern Record History of the 3rd Louisiana. Essentially taking a book published in 1866, putting in a roster and other information that the soldiers don't have. Then I did the diary of Felix Pierre Pochet. That's again a Louisiana publication that one of the universities wanted done. And the next one is an edited one, which is putting in a roster and other information on the 1st Missouri Brigade. And then I did edited a bunch of letters. Your affectionate husband, J.F. Culver. Letters written during the Civil War, Iowa City. This is a guy who got himself elected, was interested in his forebears. So that's it.
Then to follow that up, if you were to talk to high school students or freshman college students, what would be your top must-reads to prepare yourself for the Civil War? Any from back when they first came out or after the war to today.
All right, now you have, as you know, that great volume of literature on the Civil War that comes out between the end of the Civil War and probably the 1880s. That's a big era of writing on the Civil War. Then I think if you can get a good regimental history with lots of good letters, a good diary or something, it's going to be a good seller. Particularly, as I know, Younger said you couldn't lose money if you republished a book on Gettysburg. That shows so. But I think it would be the best. I think if you could find a real interesting journal, diary, is a natural winner. That is on a major battle, players. That's a major player, and you've got some primary sources. I would recommend them looking for.
So, what's looking at the must reads and all that? I mean, what is the what book would you recommend for Gettysburg and Antietam, Manassas? Do you have a specific one, or is it all encompassing?
The best book of what was the first battle?
Gettysburg.
Gettysburg, I find probably the best book on the Battle of Gettysburg is probably that one that the guy that was working for the Civil War Trust, the guy that had the letters, and he's writing on General Meade and Meade's letters.
Okay.
He's the guy that does the GPS.
Okay.
I would say a book like that would be, because you find so much good stuff in it. Like my favorite story I get out of it is when General Grant has a staff meeting at Mount Carmel Church. And at Mount Carmel Church, Grant's got a letter from Sherman. Sherman knows that Grant doesn't like Meade. And Sherman writes in this, and one of Grant's dumb staff officers, at Grant's instructions, reads it out loud. It says, it's signed from Sherman to Grant. Now, Sherman then shows that he reads military history, which Grant didn't. Grant read only romance novels. And it says, now I expect, since I have crossed the Etowah, he's crossing the Etowah to the Rubicon of Georgia, shows he reads military history. And I'm sure that, that now that the Army of the Potomac is inspired by you, I expect to hear the same thing from you. And as the staff officer says, Meade's eyes almost popped out of his eyeballs. And he says, pray tell me why the Army of the Potomac, which I've been leading, has to be inspired by you. So when they leave there at Mount Carmel Church, Grant rides Jeff Davis. He's a tall horse. Grant never liked people to be ahead of him when he would go places. Meade mounts so baldy. When the staff officer says he sees Meade is angry, he's grinding his teeth. In fact, his eyes almost popped out of his eyeballs when he read that letter. And Meade passes Grant and his staff. Meade's staff passes Grant's staff. And the situation is going to be so bad that the president's going to have to speak to them after Cold Harbor and tell them, and after the assault on the 18th day at Petersburg, which is a bigger disaster than Cold Harbor, and tells them, you boys better straighten up your act, or I ain't going to get reelected as president. If you get a book like that, I would have loved to have edited that book.
Okay. What about Antietam?
Well, I'm still waiting for the battle, the fighting on the 17th and results to come up. When is he going to finish it? He took 5 years to get them up to the evening of the 16th. When is he going to finish the book? Is he going to finish the book? If he finishes the book, you've got Antietam covered. But do you think he'll ever finish the book?
I don't know. I would hope he would.
Because he said he would finish it when he retired. And every time I ask him, he's delaying it.
You talk about Dennis, right?
But I agree. He's got to, if that's going to be the best book on Antietam, he has to finish the 17th.
Who's he?
And I would discipline myself without giving any advice. I discipline myself, like when I wrote those 3 books, to finish them. Even if I've got I'm not a great family man, so I can discipline myself, as Ted knows. I can discipline myself and will myself to do things, and my family. Not bragging about it. Sometimes ain't the first of my priorities, so I think he has to do. If he doesn't do that, he's wasted that. Do you agree?
You're talking about Dennis, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's finished one. He's self-published one book right now, so he's working. I don't know if he's finishing that one or not, but he said he's self-published. So we'll see what he's got that's coming out, because I know he's spent a good bit of time on it.
Now, Scott Hartwig's volume,
Hartwig.
that will be coming out probably next year.
No, he's been telling me it ever since 5 years ago.
You're talking about Scott Hartwig or Dennis? You're talking about Scott Hartwig or Dennis?
Hartwig, yeah.
Hartwig, yeah. So
He's been telling me since 5 years
it's supposed to
ago.
come out next year, right?
Yeah, he was at the battlefield.
You think he'll ever finish it?
Yeah, because he was at the battlefield a few weeks ago researching in our library. So
Next year. You'll have to hang around till next year to see it.
Yes. Will you twist his arm? Tell him he's got fans that are questioning him
Is there
ever
anything else?
finishing it. Now, what was the other battle?
Manassas.
Oh, Manassas. I like Hennessy's book on Second Manassas.
I do too.
Yeah, that's a good book.
I know Crick doesn't like it because Crick doesn't like Hennessy. Would you agree?
Yes. Ted had a question. It was about do you have
know
any?
who detests Hennessy?
Who?
Do you know who detests Ogden detests Crick?
Ogden.
Jim Ogden detests Crick.
Well, he's clear down in.
Huh?
He's clear down in Georgia. Why?
Yeah, he's a chit chat.
Why is he?
Because Crick is, if you're not on Lee and Jackson, or a big battle in the Civil War, Crick isn't interested in it.
Mm.
And even when Bobby was out at Little Bighorn, he wouldn't go to Little Bighorn.
Well, to wrap it up, Ed, we'll shift from Civil War. What's your favorite music and some of your favorite singers?
All right, my favorite singers. Well, I like if you could get Jimmy Cagney to sing like he did on that song that he did on the night that before we landed at Gloucester, and swoon over him.
Yeah.
That was who
I
again?
don't put Elvis in his category.
You don't like who?
Huh?
Who didn't you like?
Elvis. I don't put Elvis in the Frank Sinatra. I detest. Now it was embarrassing. Now in the orthopedic ward in a hospital, orthopedic wards are people that are going to be there for a long time. And the orthopedic wards, when he would come on the ward radio would yell, "Shut the son of a bitch off." Because an orthopedic patient is going to be the longest. Overall, orthopedic patients with serious fractures are going to be in the hospital longer than anybody else. Unless you've got a killer thing like cancer or something like that. I mean, of diseases or wounds you're going to recover from, the orthopedic wound is going to be the long one for recovery.
How about Dean Martin? Do you like him?
I like him better than his partner.
Now, Margie, she liked Dean Martin. She liked him in those westerns.
Yes,
She told me that.
yes.
she was a big fan, especially in Dean Martin westerns.
Yes. But generally, my likes on music are pretty close.
Uh-huh.
How about yours?
I like the big band stuff. I like some of the big band swing stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's what I grew up with my grandfather, listening to it, and everything. He always played that for me.
Well, the big bands would right. Fairly high.
Well, I guess the last question we have is, if you could just go, just to summarize, what does an average day for Ed Bars? I mean, what is it that you? I know you're always on the road.
An average day, I get up. Since I grew up in the country, I get up even today early. And when I worked at the Park Service, even in the Washington office, I was out that door at 7 o'clock. Because I'm an early person. And I would go, whether I was a park historian, the chief historian, or I would go in early. And I did a lot of work at home. I'm a workaholic, as the children will tell you.
Do you receive a lot of calls and people are always asking to do a forward a book or edit a book or read a book?
I get, in the last years, maybe because I'm getting as you get old, you get to be angry. My pet pick now are people who call up, and I don't know them. They want me to do something for them, or they want me to contribute money for something. And I immediately tell I'm not into shopping.
Mm.
And if I am, and I'm very jealous of my time. Tell them always I'm 95 years old. I've got one more year to make 96 years old, and I've got to make every year and minute count. And please don't bother me, and please don't want me to be buying into your television commercial.
Okay.
Yeah, Ed, I kind of acted as the middleman for Ryan, but I see you're doing an intro for Ryan's book.
What's that?
The Retreat from Gettysburg book by Tom Ryan.
You're doing an intro for Retreat from Gettysburg by Tom Ryan. Ted said he introduced the gentleman to it.
I gave it a high rating. I think I gave him a good plug.
Yeah, Ted was saying he appreciates it. You took.
Yeah, well, he's a likable guy, and I liked his. In fact, I recommended when he published 8 articles in Younger, and he says that day that's had a lot of effect. This is why he wrote the book he did, because of the articles he published in Younger. He published 8. I think he published either 7 or 8 in Younger's magazine, and I thought Younger's magazine kept me at least current on Civil War, and I thought it was a great privilege because you gave him the award, because I thought he was remarkable. He's interesting, and I was a little slow on getting it out, but I thought it was because I said it was. I thought it deserved a publication of the book. Yes.
Okay.